One, two, three. One, two. One, two, three. Cool, that's working. Da 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 da. All right, now it's working. All right. Do, do, do. All right. Everything's finally working. So, moving on, still doing the Federalist Papers, still on Hamilton. He's still talking about taxation, and I think the next few are him of the same general topic of taxation, because basically what happened is during the Articles of Confederation they had a lot of hard time dealing with taxation. The country was in a huge amount of debt, and they had no real way to raise revenues. So when the Constitution came around, they put a lot of effort and a lot of time convincing people that, hey, we can't keep doing this like real basic kind of constitutional law or Articles of Confederation taxation, where they're basically just reliant on hoping the states can supply them with the taxes that they need. All right. Before we proceed and examine any other objects to an infinite power of taxation in a union, I shall make one general mark, which is that if the jurisdiction of the national government in the article of revenue should be restricted to particular objects, it would naturally occasion an undue proportion of the public burdens to fall upon those objects. Two evils would spring from the source: the oppression of particular branches of industry and an unequal distribution of the taxes, as well as among the several states as among the citizens of the same state. Suppose, as it has been contended for, the federal power of taxation were to be confined to duties on imports, it is evident that the government, for want of being able to command other resources, would frequently be tempted to extend those duties to an injurious excess. So he's like, we can't rely just on tariffs and duties and taxes on imports and exports. There are persons who imagine that they can never be carried to too great a length, since the higher they are, the more it is alleged that they tend to discourage an extravagant consumption, to produce a favorable balance of trade, and to promote domestic manufacturers. But all extremes are pernicious in various ways. Exorbitant duties on imported articles, so whenever he says duties or imported articles, he's talking about tariffs, would beget a general spirit of smuggling, which is always prejudicial to the fair trader, and eventually to the revenue itself. So even before the Constitution is signed, they're already talking about how poor tariffs would be for a source of revenue, that it's going to really hurt. Like, it's going to be, let's see, exorbitant duties on imported articles with a general spirit of smuggling. You would encourage smuggling, like, and it'd be prejudicial, like it's going to benefit the smuggler, and the fair trader is going to be kind of screwed out. They tend to render other classes of community tributary in an improper degree to the manufacturing classes, to whom they give premature monopoly of the markets. They sometimes force industries out of the more natural channels into others in which it flows with less advantage. And in the last place, they oppress the merchant, who is often obliged to pay them himself without any retribution from the customer. When the demand is equal to the quantity of goods at market, the consumer generally pays the duty. But when the markets happen to be overstocked, a great proportion falls upon the merchant, and sometimes not only exhausts his profits, but breaks upon his capital. So it's not just the people that are paying these taxes. If the merchants will as well, if there's too much stock, it's like, well, and then they're just going to not sell that stuff anymore, which is bad for the market in his opinion. I am apt to think that a division of the duty between the seller and the buyer more often happens than is commonly imagined, and it's not always possible to raise the price of a commodity in the exact proportion to every additional imposition laid upon it. The merchant, especially in the country of a small commercial capital, is often under the necessity of keeping prices down in order to a more expeditious sale. And you also got to remember that he's trying to talk to the merchant classes, because those are the people that are going to be reading the newspapers. So he's trying to hey, we can't just rely on tariffs. This is going to hurt you as well. To the maxim that the consumer is the payer, and is so much and often truer than the reverse of the proportion, that it is far more equitable than the duties on imports should go into the common stock, that they should redound and the exclusive benefit of importing the states, but is not so generally true as to render it equitable, that those duties should form the only national fund, that they are paid by the merchant, they operate in the additional tax upon the importing state, whose citizens pay their proportion of them in the character of consumers. In this view, we are productive of the inequality among the states, which the inequality would be increased with the increased extent of the duties. The confinement of the national revenues to this species of impost would be attended with the inequality from different cause between the manufacturing and the non-manufacturing states. So he's also pointing out this would also be unfair between the states, because these states have different kinds of economies, that if we just have this one type of tax, then some states will be paying all of it and the others will be paying basically none. The states which can go furthest toward the supply of their own wants by their own manufacturers will not, according to their own numbers or wealth, consume so great a proportion of the imported articles as the states which are not in the same favorable situation. They would not, therefore, in this mode alone contribute to the public treasury in a ratio to their abilities. To make them do this is necessarily that resource which can excises the proper objects of which the particular kinds of manufactures. New York is more interested in these considerations than such of the citizens contend the limiting power of the Union. This is really interesting, because he's already talking about everyone needs to pay their fair share. It's the richer states need to pay their fair share of the taxes, which, you see, look at certain political parties today, they would not have the same kind of idea of fairness in the tax code. New York is an importing state, and not likely speedily to be, to any great extent, a manufacturing state. She would, of course, suffer in a double light of restraining the jurisdiction of the Union to commercial impost. So far as these observations tend to calculate a danger on the import duties being extended to an injurious extreme, it may be observed, comfortably to a remark made in another part of these papers, that the interest of the revenue itself would be sufficient to guard against such an extreme. I readily admit that this would be the case as long as other resources were open, but if the avenues to them were closed, hope, stimulated by necessity, would beget experiments, fortified by rigorous precaution and additional penalties, which for a time would have the intended effect, till there has been the leisure to contrive expedients to elude these new precautions. The first success would be apt to inspire false opinions, which it might require a long course of subsequent experience to correct. Necessity, especially in politics, often occasions occasions false hopes, false reasonings, and a system of measures corresponding erroneous. But even if this supposed excess would not be the consequence of the limitation of federal power of taxation, the inequalities spoken of would still ensue, though not to the same degree from the other causes have been noticed. Let us now return to the examination of the objections. All right, so he's going to attack the arguments against him, which they were putting, because there was people writing back these basically articles to each other. It was like if you want to put it in modern day, it was like they were having Twitter arguments through the newspapers but a little more highfalutin than that. One which, if we may judge from the frequency of repetition, seems most to be relied on, is that the House of Representatives is not sufficiently numerous for the reception of all the different classes of citizens. In order to combine the interest and feelings of every part of the community, and to produce a due sympathy between the representative body and its constituents. This argument presents itself under a very specious and seducing form, and it is well calculated to lay hold of the prejudice of those who it has addressed. But when we come to dissect it with attention, it will appear to be made up of nothing but fair-sounding words. Ooh, that's pretty harsh for Hamilton. He's a trash talker, but he's usually really more reserved than made up of fair-sounding words when talking about someone else's argument. The object, it seems, is, in the first place, impracticable, and the sense in which it is contended for, unnecessary. I reserve for another place the discussion of the question which relates to the sufficiency of the representative body in respect to numbers, and they shall content myself with examining here the particular use which has been made the contrary supposition in reference to the immediate subject of our inquiries. The idea of actual representation of all classes of the people by persons of each class is altogether visionary, unless it was expressly provided in the Constitution. To each different occupation should send one or more of its members, the thing would never take place in practice. Mechanics and manufacturers will always be inclined, with few exceptions, to give their vote to the merchants in preference to persons of their own professions or trade. Those discerning citizens are well aware that the mechanic and the manufacturing arts furnish the materials of mercantile enterprise and industry. Many of them, indeed, are immediately connected with the operations of commerce. They know that the merchant is their natural patron and friend, and they are aware, however, the great confidence which they may justly feel in their own good sense. Their interests can be more effectively promoted by the merchant than by themselves. They are sensible that their habits in life have not been such to give those acquired endowments, without which it deliberately assemble. The great natural abilities are for the most part useless, and that the influence and weight and superior acquirements of the merchants render them more equal to a contest with any spirit which may happen to infuse itself into the public councils. Unfriendly to the manufacturing and trading interest, these considerations and many others that might be mentioned prove, and the experience confirms it, the artisans and the manufacturers will commonly be disposed to bestow their votes upon the merchants and those whom they recommended. We must therefore consider merchants as the natural representatives of all these classes of the community. With regard to the learned professions, little need to be observed. They truly form no distinct interest in society. According to their situation and talents, will it be indiscriminately the objects of the confidence and choice of each other, the other parts of the community. Nothing remains but the landed interest, and this, in a political view, and particularly in relation to taxes, I take it to be perfectly united from the wealthiest landlord down to the poorest tenant. No tax can be laid on land which will not affect the proprietor of millions of acres as well as the proprietor of a single acre. Every landowner will therefore have a common interest to keep the taxes on land as low as possible. And common interest may always be reckoned upon as the surest bond of sympathy. But if we were to suppose a distinction of interest between the opulent landholder and the middling farmer, what reason is there to conclude that the first would stand a better chance of being deputed than the national legislator than the last? If we take the fact as our guide and look at our own Senate and Assembly, we shall find that moderate proprietors of land prevail in both. Nor is this less the case in the Senate, with which consists of a smaller number than in the Assembly, which is composed of a greater number, where the qualifications of the electors are the same, whether they have to choose a small or large number. Their votes will fall upon those of whom they have the most confidence, whether these happen to be men of large fortunes, or moderate property, or no property at all. It is said to be necessary that all classes of citizens should have some of their own number in the representative body, in order that their feelings and interests may be the better understood and attended to. But we have seen this will never happen under any arrangement that leaves the votes of the people free. Were this the case, the representative body, with too few exceptions to have the influence and the spirit of the government, will be composed of landholders, merchants, and men of learning professions. But where is the danger that the interest and feelings of these different classes of citizens will not be understood or attended to by the three descriptions of men? Will not the landholder know and feel whatever will promote or ensure the interest of the landed property? Will he not, from his own interest in that species of property, be sufficiently prone to resist every attempt to prejudice or encumber it? Will not the merchant understand and be disposed to cultivate, as far as may be proper, the interest of the mechanic and the manufacturing arts, to whom his commerce is so nearly allied? Will not the man of the learned profession, who feel the neutrality of the rivalships between the different branches of industry, be likely to prove an impartial arbiter between them, ready to promote either, so far as shall appear to him to be conductive of the general interest of the society? If we are to account the momentary humors or dispositions which may happen to prevail in particular parts of the society, and to which wise administration will never be inattentive, is the man whose situation leads to extensive inquiry and less information less likely to be a competent judge of their nature, extent, and foundation than one whose observation does not travel beyond the circle of his neighbors and acquaintances? It is not natural that a man who is the candidate for the favor of the people, and who is dependent on the suffrages of his fellow citizens for the continuance of his public honors, should take care to inform himself of the dispositions and inclinations, and should be willing to allow their proper degree of influence upon the conduct. This dependence and the necessity of being bound himself and his prosperity to the laws of which he has given his assent are the true, and they are the strong cords of sympathy between the representative and the constituent. There is no part of the administration of government that requires the extensive information and thorough knowledge of the principles of political economy so much as the business of taxation. The man who understands these principles best will be least likely to resort to oppressive expedients, or to sacrifice any particular class of citizens to the procurement of revenue. It might be demonstrated that the most productive system of finance will always be the least burdensome. There can be no doubt that in the order of judicious exercise of the power of taxation, it is necessary that the person in whose hands it should be acquainted with the general genius, habits, and modes of thinking of the people at large, and with the resources of the country. And this is all that can be reasonably meant by knowledge and interest and feelings of the people. In any other sense of the proposition has either no meaning or an absurd one, and that sense lets every considerate citizen judge for himself where the requisite qualifications is more likely to be found. Signed, Publius. Number 36. He's still going on the taxation train. I'm Alexander Hamilton. Come on. Who else could I possibly be? The same subject continued, considering the general powers of taxation. We have, for the result of the observations to which the foregoing number has been principally devoted, is that the form of natural operation of the different interests and views of the various classes of the community, whether the representation of the people be more or less numerous, it will consist almost entirely of proprietors of land, of merchants, and members of the learned professions, who will truly represent all those different interests and views. If we should be objected that we have seen other descriptions of men in the logical local legislators, I answer that it is admitted that there are exceptions to the rule, but not in sufficient number to influence the general complexion or character of the government. He was a little wrong about that one. There are strong minds in every walk of life that will rise superior to the disadvantages of situation, and will command the tribute due to their merit, not only from the classes to which they are particular belong, but from the society in general. The door ought to be equally open to all, and I trust, for the credit of human nature, that we shall see examples of such vigorous plants flourishing in the soil of the federal as well as the state legislation. But occasional instances of this sort will not render the reasoning founded upon the general course of things less conclusive. The subject might be placed in several other lights that would all lead to the same result, and in particular, it might be asked, what greater affinity or relation of interest can be conceived between the carpenter and the blacksmith, and the linen manufacturer or the stocking weaver, that between the merchant and either of them? It is notorious that there are often great rivalships between the different branches of the mechanic or manufacturing arts, as there are between the departments of labor and industry, so that unless the representative body were to be far more numerous than would be consistent with any idea of regularity or wisdom in its deliberations, it is impossible that what seems to be the spirit of the objection we have been considering should ever be realized in practice. But I forbear to dwell any longer on the matter, which has hitherto worn too loose a garb to admit even an accurate inspection of its real shape or tendency. When I think I read good, but mess up sometimes. Everybody messes up. There is another objection of somewhat more precise nature that claims our attention. It has been asserted that a power of internal taxation in the national legislature could never be exercised with advantage, as well as from want of a sufficient knowledge of local circumstances, as from an interference between the revenue laws of the Union and the particular states. The supposition of a want of proper knowledge seems to be entirely destitute of foundation. If any question is depending in the state legislature respecting one of the counties which demands a knowledge of local details, how is it acquired? No doubt from the information of the members of the county. Cannot the like knowledge be obtained by the national legislature from the representatives of each state? And it is not to be presumed that the men who will generally be sent will be possessed of the necessary degree of intelligence to be able to communicate that information. That is asking a lot. Hamilton, that is asking a lot. Is the knowledge of local circumstances as applied to taxation a minute topographical acquaintance with all the mountains, rivers, streams, highways, bypaths in each state, or is a general acquaintance with its situation and resources, with the state of agriculture, commerce, manufacture, with the natures of products of consumption, with the different degrees of kinds of wealth, property, and industry. Nations in general, even under governments of more popular kind, usually commit to the administration of their finances to single men or to boards composed of a few individuals, who digest and prepare in the first instances the plans of taxation, which are afterwards passed into laws by the authority of the sovereign or legislator. Inquisitive and enlightened statesmen are deemed everywhere best qualified to make judicious selection of the objects proper for revenue, which is a clear indication, as far as the sense of mankind can have weight in the question, of the species of knowledge, local circumstances, requisite for the purpose of taxation. The taxes indicated to be compromised under the general denomination of internal taxes may be subdivided into those of direct and the indirect kind, though the object to be made is both, yet the reasoning upon it seems to be confirmed in the former branch, and indeed as the latter, by which must understood duties and excises on the articles of consumption. One is at a loss to conceive what can be the nature of the difficulties apprehended. The knowledge relating to them must evidently be the kind that will either be suggested by the nature of the article itself, or be easily to be procured in any well-informed man, especially of the mercantile class. The circumstances that may be distinguished its situation in one state from its situation in another must be few, simple, and easy to comprehend. The principal thing to attend to would to be avoid those articles which have been previously appropriated to the particular state. And there could be no difficulty in asserting the revenue system of each. These could always be known from the respective code of laws, as well as from the information from the members of each of the states. The objection, when applied to real property or to houses and lands, appear to have... Oh, hold on. Gotta send a message real quick. The objection, when applied to real property or to houses, lands, appears to have, at first sight, more foundation. But even in this view, it will not bear a close examination. Land taxes commonly, I think, is this like, I never laid in one of those two modes, either by actual valuations, permanent or periodical, or by occasional assessment, at the discretion or according to the best judgment of certain officers whose duty is to make them. In either case, the execution of the business, which alone requires the knowledge of local details, must be devolved upon the discrete persons in the character and commissioners or assessors, elected by the people or appointed by the government for the purpose. All that the law can do must name the persons or prescribe the manner of the elected of appointment, to fix their numbers to qualifications, to draw the general outlines of the powers and duties. I'm not gonna lie, Hamilton writing about taxes is really dry. The earlier stuff was a lot more interesting. Now he's getting into the weeds, and it's, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the dryness. And what is there in all that cannot as well be performed in the national legislature as by a state legislator? The attention of either can only reach the general principle. Local details that I've already observed must be referred to those who are of the who execute the plan. There is a simple point of view in which the matter may be placed that must be altogether satisfactory. The national legislature can can make to use the system of each state within that state. The method of laying and collecting this species of taxes in each state can in all its parts be adopted and employed by the federal government. Let it be recollected that the proportion of these taxes is not to be left to discretion of the national legislator, but is to be determined by the numbers of each state, as described in the second section of the first article. An actual census or enumeration of the people must furnish the rule, a circumstance which effectively shuts the door to partiality or oppression. The abuse of this power of taxation seems to have been provided against must provide against with guarded circumspection. In addition to the precaution just mentioned, there is a provision that all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. It has been very properly observed by different speakers and writers on the side of the Constitution that if the excises of power of internal taxation by the Union should be discovered on experiment to be really inconvenient, the federal government may then forbear the use of it and have recourse to the requisitions in its stead. By way of answer to this, it has been triumphantly asked, why not in the first instances omit that ambiguous power and rely upon the latter resources? Two solid answers must be given. The first, that the excise of the power, if confident, will be preferable, because it will be more effectual, and it is impossible to prove in theory or otherwise than by experiment that it cannot be advantageously exercised. The contrary indeed appears most probable. The second answer is that the existence of such a power in the Constitution will have strong influence in giving efficacy to its requisitions. When the states know that the Union can apply itself without their agency, it will be a powerful motive for the exertion on their part. As to the interference of the revenue laws in the Union and of its members, we have already seen that there can be no clashing or repugnancy of the authority. The laws cannot, therefore, in a legal sense, interfere with each other, and it is far impossible to avoid an interference even in the policy of their different systems. An effectual expedient for this purpose will be mutually to abstain from those objects which either side may have first had its recourse, as neither can control the other. Each will have an obvious and sensible interest in the reciprocal forbearance. And where there is an immediate common interest, we may safely count upon its operation. When these particular debts of states are done away, and the expenses come to be limited within their national compass, the possibility almost of inference will vanish. A small land tax will answer the purpose of the states, and will be their most simple and most fit resource. No, it's not a Sovereign Citizens channel. I'm reading the Federalist Papers for the Constitution. Nothing to do with sovereign citizens. All right. Many spectators have raised out this power of internal taxation to excite the apprehensions of the people. Double sets of revenue officers the duplication of their burdens by double taxation, and the frightful forms of odious and oppressive poll taxes have been paid off with all ingenious dexterity of political ledgermen. No, you're fine. I can see what it was doing, especially since Hamilton's going on about state and federal taxes. This is like his third one, and I think there's one more, all just about how he thinks the tax system should be. Whew. As to the first point, there are two cases in which there can be no room for double set of officers. One, where the right of imposing the tax is exclusively vested in the Union, which applies to the duties on imports. The other, where the object has not fallen under any state regulation or provision, which may be applicable for the various objects. In other cases, the probability is that the United States will either wholly abstain from the objects preoccupied for local purpose, or will make use of the state officers and state regulations for collecting the additional imposition. This will be the best answers for the views of revenue. No, I'm not a cosplayer. It's just for fun. Because it will save expense in the collection, and will best avoid any occasion to discuss the state governments and the people. At all events, here is the practical expedient for avoiding such an inconvenience. Then nothing more can be required than to show the evils predicted, not necessarily result. It's a tricorn. It's a cheap one that I got off Amazon. It doesn't actually fit. It's just kind of sitting on my head. To any argument derived from a supposed system of influence is a sufficient answer to say that it ought not be presumed, but the supposition is susceptible of more precise answer. If such a spirit should infest the councils of the Union, the more certain road to the accomplishments of its aim would be to employ the state officers as much as possible, and to attach them to the Union by the accumulation of their annulments, which would serve to turn the tide of the state influence into the channels of the national government. That's the idea. I'm trying to be as much Alexander Hamilton as I can. Instead of making the federal influence flow in an opposite and adverse current. But all superstitions of this kind are invidious. I might be saying that wrong. Leading to the cause of resentment, envy, or unfair or offensive discrimination, and ought to be banished from the consideration of great question before the people. They can answer no other end than to cast the mystery. You know, I keep meaning to. I've never seen Hamilton. I've read, this is the second time going through the entire Federalist Papers. I've read everything he's read, but I've never seen the play that was about him. I know, it's bad. I've read, I think I've read everything that's, free use of his writing, which I think is almost everything. But, yeah, I don't even know where to watch it. I'm not going to... Favorite president. FDR is pretty high up there. I also really like Teddy. He has a really cool story. He goes through a lot of cool stuff. He did a lot of important things that needed to get done. Either Roosevelt I'd be pretty cool with. They both did a lot of stuff that was really good. All right. Oh, poll taxes. Okay. I know he hated poll taxes. What does he have to say about poll taxes? As everyone should hate poll taxes. As to poll taxes, I, without scruple, confess my disappropriation of them, and though they have prevailed from an early period in those states which has uniformly been the most tenuous of their rights, I should lament to see them introduced into practice under the national government. The JFK thing. This is my thing with the JFK thing. I don't know, but it's you have the official story, which I think you can poke some holes in the official story, and you can make some inferences that things were wrong. But then it's every counter story to the JFK story is that you have to make they start off with twice as many holes. You have to make one inference and a second inference and a third inference instead of just, you have a solid story with some holes in it, or you have a 5 inferenced story with just as many holes. It's okay, the official story might be wrong, but every single conspiracy theory I've ever heard about the JFK is full of just as many holes as or way more than the official story. But does it follow because there is a power to lay them and that they will actually be laid? Every state in the Union has a power to impose taxes of this kind, and yet in several of them there are an unknown practice, and the state governments to be stigmatized as tyrannies because they possess this power. If they are not, with what propriety can the like power justify such charge against the national government, or even be urged as an obstacle to adoption? As little friendly as I am to the species of imposition, I still feel as though conviction that the power of having recourse to ought to exist in the federal government. There are certain emergencies of the nation in which expedients that in the ordinary state of things ought to be forbone, because the essential to the public weal, is it weal? Whale? W-E-A-L? It's like, okay, I don't think that's the right definition. It's not a swollen mark. The Second Amendment, is very complicated. It has changed over time. So the first part of the Second Amendment is that it was it would have been better to go over this when we were going over when he was talking about militias. The militias were a completely unnecessary thing. So if you read what Hamilton, if we were going to do this, we'll do it through what Hamilton once said. Okay, so the Supreme Court says this power to the militias that the Second Amendment gives is passed on to the citizens because they are now taking over the role that the militia was taking. So, as far as that goes, the states have complete right over the regulation and equipment and doing that of the militia. So if this logic train follows, the federal government has very limited power in regulating anything to do with the Second Amendment. But the state governments, as far as the Second Amendment goes, should have infinite power in that respect. So, like, if California wanted to come out tomorrow and ban all people from buying firearms in California, they constitutionally, they could. The state has the right to no, militias in the sense where back then they were basically, like, they were cops. They were like protection against invasion. They were, if other states rebelled, you can move in, you could go in there. If there was a rebellion, or British came down from Canada, there would be like the first line of defense. Or if the federal government started like being like completely tyrannical, the militias were expected to go in and put down the tyrannical government and put in the new government and take the leaders out. Do you think we need militias today? If you asked me 10 months ago, I would have said, no, it's kind of an outdated concept. But after the last 10 months, I think you as a citizen should protect your rights as you see fit. Let's just leave it at that. But as far as like militias, as far as like most things they do, no, we don't really need militias. We're not, we don't have like lawless frontiers that need protection. We're not really worried about the British coming down from we're not worried about the British coming down, and we need like a first line of defense coming from Canada or Spain coming up through Florida. So for most things in the militia, you don't need, but the idea of the militias was to put a fear into the federal government that there is a counterbalance to you. You could never take things to some kind of extreme, that there was always an internal force that could push against you. Would the government be against militias? I have no idea. I don't think that's actually anything. I would never be afraid of the British for any reason whatsoever. No, and if you see some wooden, if you have like a fear of wooden boats, that was the time they were at their zenith. After that, though, I think you'll be all right. All right. And the governments, from the possibility of such emergencies, ought to ever have the opinion of making use of them. The real scarcity of objects in this country, which may be considered as predictive sources of revenue, is a reason peculiar to itself for not abridging the discretion of the national councils in this respect. There may exist a certain critical and tempestuous conjectures of the state, in which a poll tax may become an inestimate resource. And as I know nothing to exempt this portion of the globe from the common calamities that have befallen other parts, I acknowledge my aversion to every project that is calculated to disarm the government of a single weapon, which is the possible contingencies which might be usefully employed for the general defense of security. Well, yeah, that's true. They do have some awful food. But don't worry, like, they don't have the means to. They have an economy like the size of Mississippi. It takes them a lot to get it over here. I have now gone through the examination of such the powers proposed vested in the United States, which may be considered as having an immediate relation to the emergency of the governments, and have endeavored to answer the principal objections which have been made to them. I have passed over in silence those minor authorities, which are either too inconsiderable to have been even thought worthy of the hostilities of the opponents of the Constitution, or of too manifest property to admit the controversy. The mass judiciary power, however, might have claimed the investigation under this head, and have not been further considerate that the organizations to this extent may be advantageously considered in its connection. This has determined me to refer to the branch of our inquiries upon which we shall next enter. Oh, that's the last taxation one. Going on to Madison, which Hamilton would be vastly disappointed. Hamilton had he had a real rose-tinted, I wouldn't say rose-tinted. That would make him sound like he was being naive. But he had his ideas were sound. Like, everything he thought was like were good ideas to try to this counterbalance. But he thought politicians would act more rationally. They thought that, there would be a lot more counterbalance between the states. There would be a lot more counterbalance between the different branches that there are. He thought there would actually be probably more contention, but it would be more balanced. There wouldn't be all this Congress giving away their powers to the executive just because they're of the same party. He thought people would want, he's understood that there would be these fights and really contentiousness, but he thought it would be between the branches, not between different parties in the branches. He talked a lot about and they thought the states were probably going to have a lot more power than they did. He thought the states would be a big counterbalance to the federal government. And they were, and as far as that goes, the states have been not as much of a counterbalance in the last, probably since the Civil War. States lost a lot of their bargaining power, or a lot of their counterbalance to the federal government after that. I mean, people there's probably some that would but honestly, a lot of them would be they've lost a lot of their bargaining power when it comes to after interstate commerce, where the federal government could make a lot of laws that would just surpass, or in the supremacy clause probably went a lot farther than what Hamilton thought it would. He Like, yeah, there's the supremacy clause. Like, Kesey writes it, I think, oh man, it had to be in the 20s where he got to the supremacy clause, in the late 20s. But in the Federalist Papers, you'd have to find it. It's in there somewhere. He thought, like, okay, because he made it like, he's like, oh, don't worry about the supremacy clause. I know it's in there, but no, I'm not. I went to college for history, actually, and like I was one semester away before I had to drop out because I had to. I had to, like, I had too many medical bills, and like my roommate left, so I was like working doubles, so I didn't ever even finish my last semester of college. But yeah, I was in college for history. But thank you. I was almost done. Actually, I had finished all my history classes. The only thing I had was like, I had like a German class and there was some other stupid stuff. For some reason, I took German. I don't know why. I had German 3 left and some other, like, I think I had one economic elective left. I think there was like 4 or 5 classes all I had left. I should go back, but I'm working full time now. So I'll just make history my hobby. History and economics my hobby. I might, if I can, if I could like do, if I could work less, if I'd find a way to work a little less, I definitely would do it. Hey, maybe this, I'm just streaming fun right now, but if that took off, I'd go back to college. I have no expectations that will ever happen, but it's fun. I like to do it. I like to read history stuff, share it with people. But that's good stuff. I like to say that I work in the restaurant business, but really I'm more of on like the supply side, like more on like the transportation stuff. I was working at a pizza place when I was in college. I still actually work there sometimes on the weekends because I got friends with the owners, and they'll be like, "Hey, you want to deliver pizzas on Friday?" And like, I'll give you an extra $20 and you can keep your tips. I was like, okay. So I'll still do that every once in a while. But anyway, that restaurant, I got worked in with their shipping supply company. It's good to refresh yourself in history because Einstein said if you don't learn it, you'll repeat it. Yeah, that's his famous quote. I I just like learning history. It's not like, if you can read this old stuff, you'll understand like, oh, that's why that is. Oh, that's why that is. Like stuff you're like, why do they even do it like that? Or you hear people. What's really concerning about when you read about history, favorite history, probably early 20th century. That's what I was like doing my final like research on, and like my big like that kind of stuff. I was doing just writing this big. I remember my last thing I did was a giant research paper. It was like, God, I think it was like, spent like 2 semesters on it. This paper on the Lend-Lease program, mid 20th century in the Old West. The Old West is crazy. That's good. Mid 20th century is really good too. But I, for some reason, because like my minor was economics, so when I first read about Lend-Lease and all that stuff, like the numbers like blew my mind. See, I like what I learned since high school. I learned more about history out of school than I did. I would say I learned different stuff. I wouldn't like say more. It just depends on which. With school, you're dependent on 2 things because nobody likes to be forced to learn something. World War II, by far, not even close. Yeah, not never pick one. But as I was saying, yeah, like you have to have your own motivation to learn. So you can learn a lot in school, but you got to have your own motivation. Well, I mean, everything you learn is going to be subjective. Like, no matter, you can't have unsubjective history. You can try to be as unbiased as you possibly can, but there's always going to be some kind of bias, or there's going to be some kind of, somebody's opinion is leaking in. You just, it's just like when people are like, oh, I don't like reading the news because it's so biased. It's like, yeah, but the facts are going to be in there. Like, you might hate Fox News. It's like, okay, I don't like Fox News. I'm never going to watch Fox News. But I can read an article on Fox, and even if it's like extremely biased, yeah, but that's just not human nature. It's impossible to be completely neutral. You can try your best, and you should try your best, but it's never going to happen. But anyway, like I was saying, like, I could read a Fox News article, and I know it's biased, but I can like look in there, and like the facts are going to be there. They're not going to like just lie about the facts, but they might try to like twist it or put extra facts in there to try to twist it. Oh yes, kiss, kiss, good night. I'm not going to kiss the camera, but you have a good night. Here's a perfect example. January 6th has been doted as the only time someone has done that. And hold on. Okay, sorry. I have to go to that. I will be right back. I'll pause this real quick. I'll be right back. I'll answer whatever you ask. Oh. All right. I am back. Trying to decide if I'm going to do any more Federalist papers. Might do. I think I could do one more. Unless this is a two-parter. It's a two-parter. Dang it, Madison. Why can't you be more succinct? In the 80s, Democrat run organization, college Capitol fires, January 6th. January 6th wasn't bad because people were protesting inside the Capitol. January 6th, like, was bad for its motivations and timing. If you're set at a goal to... Another Nick Cage movie deal is behind the doy. I don't know what that means. Sorry, Jesus. Because the stated goal was the delay of the certification of the electors. If you can protest the Capitol all you want, you can't riot at the Capitol without it being illegal, but it is treasonous when your goals are to the stopping of the 80s. The Democrats, their goal wasn't to stop the certification of the election. They weren't told to go there at the certification of the election. Oh, I get you now, Jesus. So they could bring in a second set of electors that were illegally chosen. and there wasn't a from the top movement to say, hey, slow down the certification election. We didn't have the president calling in and saying, hey, stop the certification of the election, bring in these electors that I've chosen, that I have called in, and then go to the Capitol, stop the certification, slow it down, or stop it altogether, which they did. They went there and they achieved their goal of stopping the certification of the election. The only problem was they didn't accept his false slate of electors. That's when January 6th gets bad. You can go to the Capitol, you can protest the election, do all that, you can riot, and then you're trespassing, doing that illegal. I don't know why you're comparing these things. These aren't comparable. There's somebody did something bad in the 80s, an individual or some small group did something bad in the 80s, and it's not comparable to a treason. There's a difference between, rioting and treason. There's a difference between, trespassing and treason. No, attack is not an attack. If somebody hits you with their car, that's bad. The intention also matters. If they were trying to run you over your car, it's murder. If they did it on accident, it's manslaughter. So yes, no, an attack is not an attack. If your goal to go to the Capitol is that you're bad and you want to, protest the government, that's one thing. And somebody does an attack and that's bad. But if the president tells you to go there to stop the certification of the election, sends a slate of fake electors, and then you try to stop the certification of the election, you do stop the certification of the election, you delay it for an entire day, your goal is treason. Your goal is to usurp the power of the Constitution. Your goal is to usurp the role of the people. There's a difference. It's not the same thing. All right. Do you think there's a difference between the Summer of Love and January 6th? Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't think people should riot, but I wouldn't call them treasonous for rioting. If somebody, catches a car on fire, I think they should be charged with a crime. It's probably arson. If somebody goes into the Capitol and tries to stop an election and tries to usurp the power of the people, I think they should be charged with treason. So I would say the difference would be arson and treason. But they claim... I would say it is. I would rather lose property than the Constitution. I think the Constitution is more important than property. I think the people that destroyed property should be arrested and tried for crimes. And I think the people that tried to usurp the power of the Constitution, usurp the power of the people, usurp the federal government, should be charged with treason. And death and vandalism and opportunity to steal stuff that you wouldn't have normally and claim it. I don't even know what you mean by that. And death and vandalism, opportunity to steal stuff that wouldn't have normally to claim it. Yes, again. I think the Constitution is more important than property. And they're both crimes, and they should be treated as crimes. People died more on summer living. A lot of people died during the American Revolution. That doesn't mean I don't think we should have fought it. People also died on January 6th. I don't know what this false equivalency is. There was, there was a lot of protest. Then there was also some riots. It's some of the protests got out of hand and turned into riots. These aren't all the same thing. That's not true. That is just straight up untrue. A lot of these people that got caught and went to jail. Maybe some of them got away. A lot of them got arrested. A lot of them were in jail. A lot of them are still in jail. What? Did you just confess to a crime? I'm really hoping that was a mistype. The ratio between protests and riots were hardly comparable. The protests were very small in the riot. No, that's not true. There was like 6 months of protest. No, that's not true. There was like, I think there was like 20 million people worth of protest in like a week, and then there was like, in the thousands of riots of people rioting. Yeah, it's not comparable. It's like 1% of less than 1% of the people protesting ever rioted. So yeah, this is just some made up like fantasy. This is like, oh, I need to make myself feel better because I want to excuse the treason that was on my side with something bad that happened on the other side. And, but a lot of people tried to treason the government, betray the Constitution. But that's justified because there was riots in the summer a couple years ago. Before that, it's like, okay. It's right. Yeah, so I don't really see these things as somewhat comparable because they're not. People shouldn't riot. You shouldn't destroy people's stuff, and you shouldn't try to coup the government. I don't think there's anything really beyond that. All right. I got a little sidetracked, so we only got through a few tonight, but I do need to get ready for bed here. Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of people dismissing stuff that they probably shouldn't have. That's just kind of how team sports work sometimes. Oh no, it's all good. I am gonna go to bed though. I am tired as heck. I hope everyone has a good night and sleeps well. Throw me a follow if you want. I'd appreciate it. But other than that, I'm going to bed. I hope everyone has a good time. I'll do back maybe tomorrow, if not next Wednesday. Gonna try to get through 40 of the Federalist papers.